be seated.
Well, good morning. I wanted to introduce myself. It's good to be with you. My name is Mephibosheth. Yeah, say that 5 times fast. When I went to school and the teachers first read my name on the roll, they never got it right. Mephibosheth, present. Yeah, hey, whatever works. Imagine me, a little kid, trying to learn how to spell that, let alone write it in Hebrew from right to left on the top of all my papers. Remind me to thank Mom and Dad for that one, right? Here's the worst thing about having a long name like mine is that I've yet to go into a gift shop and be able to find Mephibosheth on a keychain or on a magnet. So if you guys bump into one, would you please, pick one up for me? I'd love that. But anyways, you'll get it. Get my name over time the more that you use it. Just remember this, it's really easy. It's Mephibosheth with a PH. It's easy. It's easy. I probably need to start and explain a little bit of the obvious. I wish that I could stand and greet you this morning, but I can't. I'm handicapped, and my legs, my feet don't work. It's been that way for a long, long time. I wasn't born that way. It actually came as a result of a significant accident that happened when I was just a little boy, which actually is a really good place to begin sharing with you some important things that I want to talk to you about this morning. So probably best that I go way back to my earliest days and share with you some of the early memories that I have. They're actually really good ones. I grew up in a really prosperous home. We were royalty. I mean, literally. My dad was a prince, which meant my grandfather was a king. Might help you if you know their names. My dad's name was Jonathan. My grandfather's name was Saul. Yeah, a little easier to say than Mephibosheth. And, as a royal family, we really had like everything that money could buy. We had a beautiful palatial home. We had servants, we had horses and activities, we had food. Oh man, the food was amazing. Anything that you wanted to eat. Just so many great memories. A lot of people who had that kind of an upbringing would say, yeah, I had all of these things, but the one thing I was missing was a loving and a present parent in my life. Well, that wasn't my story either. My dad was amazing. He was such a godly man. He loved people. He loved us as kids. He was always present, full of courage and virtue. He was a friend to so many people. That is such a great upbringing. Now, I got to tell you that being royalty has its perks, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything in life is easy. Our country, Israel, has a lot of enemies. And as royal family, as my grandfather being king, my father being prince, one of their sworn duties was to protect our country. So on one fateful occasion, when our arch enemies, the Philistines, came, my grandfather and my father raised up a war band. They went out to fight, and they were defeated. I actually never saw my beloved father again. All of this is the backdrop to a really dark day in my life. In our situation, when a king dies, there's just a whole lot of chaos that ensues. There's a lot of angst as the country wonders, okay, who's going to come to power? Who's going to be in charge? Where is power going to land? I'm sure your political system doesn't have any of that kind of thing that happens, but it's what happens in ours. And in that moment, my well-meaning nanny thought, you know what? I need to protect the child under my care. She thought it would probably be good just for a little while to put me into hiding until everything settled and the dust settled. But when she picked me up and as we fled, that's when it happened. She was carrying me. She fell. We fell. We fell hard. My legs, my feet were crushed. I've never walked again. Eventually, a really kind man by the name of Makir took us in. And I'm always grateful for his generosity. I'm grateful for even some of the risks that he took, taking me under his care as part of Saul's line. But let's just say this, my life did change. I wasn't royalty anymore. I was provided with shelter, was provided for food. Again, so much generosity, but my life had changed. I missed my family. I missed my dad. Of course, amongst this newness of life, the biggest difficulty for me was dealing with my disability. Now, I worked as hard as I could to try to gain upper body strength, to be able to do things myself, but there's no way around it. I felt helpless. It was a world of great demands, violently so, and there I was without the ability to move and be able to walk. On top of that, I always just felt like I was a burden to the people who were around me. And I always had this gnawing feeling that maybe one day they were just going to get tired of taking care of me. They were going to say, you know what, this is a burden, and just toss me over, not want anything to do with me anymore. To add and to compound to that, I had one other gnawing fear. It was actually something that haunted me on a regular basis. Would the new king ever come and hunt me down? As the last member of Saul's line, I was what you'd call a loose end. And kings in my day don't like loose ends. Now, the king after my grandfather Saul was none other than the legendary King David, giant slayer. And I got to tell you, I've heard lots of stories about King David, good stories. I've heard that he's actually merciful and that he's kind. And a lot of people have actually told me that my dad and him were very close. But that was a long time ago. And again, I'm a liability. Kings don't like loose ends. So I just always wondered if I would be hunted down and taken care of. Again, as the last member of Saul's line, I pose a threat. Not so much because I'm strong in and of myself, but because of what other people who would challenge David's rule and want to delegitimize his reign would want to make of me. One day my fears came true. A group of soldiers came. They knocked on Makir's door. And they said, "King demands to see you." So they brought me to Jerusalem to see the king. And I thought, this is it. This is my moment. I'm done for. But what happened next is part of a remarkable turn that occurred in my life. When I was brought before this legendary, strong, epic King David, I really thought that I was going to hear words of condemnation and judgment and off with his head. But to my absolute astonishment, I heard the exact opposite. This king said that he wanted to show me mercy. And he wanted to show me kindness. And he wanted to pour out generosity to me. And all because he loved my father, was committed to the relationship they had together. In our language, we have a really special word for this. It's the word hesed. It's like the strongest, greatest word that we have in the Hebrew language for loving kindness, loyal kindness. And sometimes it's experienced the most and the clearest when it's expressed to someone that has no chance of ever paying that person back. That's what David wanted to show me. He said that he was going to give back all the land that had been taken from my family. He also told me that I was going to be treated like one of his own sons, and from this point on, I was going to actually eat at his table and be provided food from his own storehouses. It was amazing. I felt so unworthy, and I remember even telling David that. I'm like, David, I'm just a dog. Look at me. Why would you do this for someone like me? But he insisted because he wanted to pour out this loving kindness. This word, chesed, it's really the perfect word to describe the way that David treated me. Faithful, generous, loyal, loving kindness. I wonder, do you guys have a word in your language that expresses something like that? You know, my life changed. Like overnight, I was royalty again. I had shelter, I had protection, there were servants around us, I had food. But I got to tell you, amidst all those blessings, probably one of the most amazing parts of that change was actually getting to spend time in the presence of a king like David. I mean, he was everything that the stories that I had heard actually had told about. He was kind and he was generous. He actually reminded me a lot like my dad, and it was no surprise to me that I'd learned more about the friendship that they shared together. Now, I got to tell you, I mean, David was a mighty warrior. He was a great king, amazing leader. But more than anything, it was his songs. It was the music that you got to hear him sing. And again, I got to explain that because, I mean, David's a fair singer. He can hold his own, plucking the lyre. But more than anything, he's a lyricist. The words of his songs are what's amazing. You just listen going, where does he get this stuff? And at the heart of his songs is Chesed. Chesed, this awesome idea of an amazing and a great God over all things who absolutely loves to pour out loving, gracious, faithful, loyal kindness to people, undeserving people who are never going to be able to pay him back. And I often just sat there and wondered, where did he get this stuff? Where did these amazing thoughts and words come from? Was it all the years as a shepherd as he sat by the fire at night? Was it his years as a fugitive facing so much trouble? I'm sure those things played into it. But at the end of the day, as you listen, you just conclude that God's hand is on him. God puts these words in David's heart. It's an awesome thing to be blessed by and get to learn from. I wish that I could say that my new life in the palace and the way that I just described it continued days without end. But I have to share with you that over the last few years, things in the palace have actually been pretty difficult. And things have all backed up to a very dark turning point in the life of King David. I'll share with you the way that I experienced them. You know, as someone who's experienced a disability like me, one of the things that has developed in my life is a real keen sense of awareness. I see a lot of things that other people don't see. And so it actually began with one spring, the warriors and the soldiers going out to war, but David didn't go with them. Immediately that struck me as not right. That wasn't King David. He always had this burden to protect the people and to be faithful and to go out before them, but this time not. You know, shortly after that, I started to notice changes in the king. He seemed worried. He seemed protective. Then over the next few weeks and month, he actually became surly and distracted and even mean. And as I watched this behavior, I just kept wondering what's going on, but I couldn't figure it out. Well, over time, the reality of what had happened became known and was made clear. It was one faithful night. We were gathered around David's table. And the prophet Nathan made a surprise visit and said that he had something to share with David. He began by telling this rather peculiar story about this strong person that had everything, a wealthy man. And yet, even in the midst of everything that he had been blessed with, he stole another poor man's sheep, the sheep that was very precious and beloved to him. We were all listening with really rapt attention, but little did we know that this was no bedtime tale. It became clear to us through the prophet Nathan that this was actually a metaphor of judgment. The punchline of this story was that actually, in reality and in real life, David was this wealthy man. And he had become the aggressor. He had stolen a precious sheep from another person. Indeed, it became even more clear that David had been guilty of the horrendous sins of adultery and murder. You know, when my nanny that day fell, my legs were crushed. When all of us heard of what David had done, our hearts were crushed. The entire kingdom was just devastated. Mighty David had fallen. It was the darkest of days. You know, another thing about my disability is that it gives me a lot of time to think. And so in the seasons after David's fall, I spent a lot of time pondering this question. What happened? What happened in David's heart between the chesed that he showed me, this loving, generous, over-the-top gift given to me, someone that could never repay, and then this awful, selfish, abusive, murderous behavior that he showed to Uriah and to Bathsheba? What happened in between? And the more that I ponder that, the more that I come back to this simple thought. I think David forgot the chesed that he had experienced in his life. He forgot the fact that, just like me, he's a person who is desperately in need of eating from a king's table. In himself, he didn't have the food and the richness that he needed. Just like me, he was desperately needy, but he had forgotten that. At one time, those were the words of his heart and his song. I mean, he would sing about how he was a nobody shepherd who God had lifted up to be the king of Israel. He would tell everybody that he was once a fugitive on the run, wondering if he had one more day to live, only to have God rescue him from all of his enemies. Again, those were the themes of his heart. But over time, I think that David forgot the chesed that had been shown to him, this loyal, loving kindness. And when that happens in a person's heart, it was just one more step that David took to thinking that he was the master of the banquet. He was the supplier of the food. And then it was his choice to gorge himself on whatever food he wanted, whenever he wanted. You know, as someone who's experienced a lot of weakness, you know, I've seen those same things bear out in the lives of a lot of people as they grow strong. You know, stronger a person gets, a lot of times they think, I don't need anything from anybody. And I certainly don't need a God to provide to me what I need. Other times, as people grow strong, they start to think, you know what? God owes me what He's given to me. And they start to take advantage of that. They think that they actually earned it. You know, other times as people grow strong, they get used to people looking to them in that way, and they see that they can leverage that for their advantage. They start to abuse that. And then still even other times as people grow strong, they start to think, you know what? I deserve a break. I deserve a little bit of fun on the side. And I just wonder if all of those things played together into the erosion of David's heart. It can erode even the strongest of human hearts. You know, as I think about things, one thing that I can share with you is that the story that I have for you this morning is not all bad news. I wouldn't want you to leave here thinking that. In fact, I have a little bit of good news. In fact, maybe even the best of news. And just like that time that David showed me chesed, and I was surprised, the good news that I have to tell you is about another significant and amazing turning point in this story. The good news I have to share with you this morning is that I think that David has remembered chesed. That he can't feed himself. That he needs to eat from the table of the king. You know, the amazing thing, what I'm so grateful for, is that after hearing from Nathan, the end result was that David did not run away from God. Instead, he chose to run towards God. And as he did, he remembered the God of amazing, loyal, loving kindness, a God who delights to pour that out to people, and again, people who can never repay that. David remembered the words of his very own song, that God is a good shepherd, a shepherd that leads him to green pastures, pastures that are served up at his very own table. And sure enough, David still has a whole lot of problems in his life, and his sin let stuff out of the box that can never be put away. But now as David faces those things, he knows that he doesn't do them alone. He has a faithful, a strong, and a mighty king who delights and who is ready to pour out chesed into his life. David is singing again. And he's singing these songs about the loyal, steadfast love of God. Except you know what? This time, his singing's even deeper. And his singing is even more dependent on that chesed that he sees as a precious and a treasured gift. Everything that I've experienced in my life, everything that I watched happen in David's life has convinced me that these are stories that I need to keep telling over and over again, and why I'm really grateful to get to share them with you today. There's a lot of reasons why I want to make sure that I keep telling these stories the rest of my life. The one is because it describes the God of Israel, a God of amazing, steadfast love. And this chesed, and the fact that over and over again, when people meet this God, this is what they experience. You know, I want to share this story also because God's chosen king, David, when he poured out this chesed to me, he was just reflecting the heart of our great king, Jehovah God. You know, this fact makes me expectant because, you know, David has talked to us about how God has promised him a dynasty. That one day an even greater son will come, who God is going to do great and awesome things through. And so what I get excited about is thinking, man, if this is the kind of chesed that David showed to a person like me, I wonder what kind of loving kindness his greater son is going to show people in this world. It makes me excited. Makes me expectant. You know, I also want to tell this story because it's a great reminder to you and to me that no matter how strong we ever feel, the truth of the matter is this: we are all just beggars telling other beggars where to find bread at the table of the king. That's just where we all are every day, no matter how strong that we feel. And then the one other reason that I tell this story is because I know that every day I'm just one step away from forgetting the chesed that has been poured out to me. Only time will tell. But I've seen where forgetfulness leads. I don't want to end up there and live there myself. I want to live continually at the table of the King. So I thank you this morning for the opportunity that you've given to me to get to share my story with you. I pray that daily you will live at the banquet of the great Jehovah, just enjoying his chesed that he has poured out to you, telling other people about the chesed that he has shown to you. And to help you remember, I pray that you can remember my story. And I hope to remember my story, you can remember my name. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth with a PH. God bless you all.